This week in the field, it's a Q&A episode. Lots of questions about exposure and one about using a polarizer on cloudy days. Hi everyone, my name is Scott Davenport. Welcome to In the Field. This week's a Q&A episode. Before I dive into the questions, if you have questions you want to have answered, send them my way. You can contact me through my website, you can leave a comment here in the video. However you'd like to get in touch with me, I'll turn an answer around to you, usually in a couple of days. And if your question is something I think will be of broad interest to everyone, I'll share it here on one of the Q&A episodes. So with that, let's get into our questions. So the first one is from Johan in Oregon. And he asked, can I use or should I use a polarizer on a cloudy day? That's probably a bad question because of course you can always do something. But should I use a polarizer on a cloudy day? The answer is yes, you can. And what polarizers are going to do is they're going to help you cut and manage reflections. You're not going to have a strong sun coming in at a 90-degree angle to the camera because it's cloudy and overcast. But if you're shooting at a place that has a lot of water, or even in a forest to a lesser degree because you'll have some of the reflection off leaves, but particularly for water, turning your polarizer can cut the reflections of what is the gray sky bouncing off of the water's surface. And so this is not a very flattering photo, but here's an example of a scene where the polarizer is not active or not rotated in the right position. And so you're getting a lot of bounce of that gray. And so the water has this like almost pastel kind of feel. And then here's the same scene with the polarizer rotated and the water is much darker because you're cutting those reflections coming off. So polarizers are still useful on cloudy days, all depending on what it is you're trying to achieve with your photograph. Next question is from Peter in Washington. This came up during one of our workshops in San Diego. Why are my photos coming out so dark? So we're all out at this location and we're taking photos, and every one of his was very, very underexposed. It had to do with the metering mode set in the camera. So take a step back. What's a metering mode? Well, it's telling your camera how do you want it to interpret the scene and what do you want it to expose for. And you can have a variety of metering modes. One would be a spot metering, like the smallest amount. So imagine your full frame, and then you're dulling the camera. Only pay attention to the amount of light in this portion of the frame and forget about everything else and expose for that. Then there's something in between. I forget what it's called on Nikon and Sony. And then there is consider everything that's in the frame. Nikon and Sony call that matrix metering. I think Canon calls it evaluative metering. So evaluate the entire amount of light that's coming into the camera. And that was what was going on. Peter's camera was set to spot metering. And it wasn't considering the brighter sky and so forth. And so everything was coming out very dark. So if you're having that and you're just taking shots over and over and over, where you're expecting one exposure and you're getting something else, check the metering setting on your camera. Sailesh in California asked, my photos are coming out a little bit soft, the focus-wise, what's going on here? This is another question that came up during our photo workshop. And worked with Sailesh looking at his camera and figuring out how he was focusing. And so there's the pieces of, well, you're doing a landscape and so you have lots of depth in your scene. But this was more about, I'm focused on this particular area, this rock, this horizon, whatever it is, and it felt a little bit soft. There are different focusing modes in your camera, and what I always shoot with is spot focus, so a single point. And I want to pick something in the frame and say that's going to be sharp. And there are, similar to the previous question with the metering modes, there's ranges of where do you want to focus. There's that full matrix focusing. Anything shows up in the frame, go ahead and try to focus on it. And then there's something in between where I know in Nikon cameras, I think they tout it for sports or things where you know there's going to be motion in the frame and you kind of know generally where it is, but you're not certain. So it has like this group of points, like a small circle. That's the setting that Sailesh had on his camera. And what that could do is you're telling the camera kind of focus somewhere around here. Now in a landscape, if that somewhere is containing a rock that's closer to the camera versus the oceans or mountains or something that's farther away, the camera might not select what it is you really want to have in focus. And you're giving the camera some latitude in where it's going to focus. So if you're noticing that and you are on a tripod and you're setting focus, you're getting focus lock, but things in the frame that you expect to be sharp still look soft, take a look at what focus mode you're using. And my recommendation is to use single point. Next question came in on the YouTube channel, and the question is, how do you get a sharp subject in a long exposure? And this came on one of the photos I shared was a silhouetted person standing out on the beach looking out at a pier. And this was maybe a half second to a second long shot. So for that particular photo, I was just fortunate. The person was standing still, and they stayed still for the duration of the exposure. And most people can stand still for a half second to a second without really an issue. But more generally speaking, what else can you do if you want to have a 2-second, 5-second, 10-second exposure, but you want a silhouette or a person or something in the foreground that's going to be crisp. Something that comes to mind I haven't personally done, but is to light paint it or pop it with a quick flash. So you shine a flash on that person or pop it for whatever it is, a quarter second. And then after that, you can even have the person walk out of the frame if you're going to be shooting for 20-30 seconds. And you'll still have that image of that person there. Another approach would be to take more than one exposure, more than one shot, and blend them together, where the first shot might be your long exposure of everything, and the second might be the same scene but at a high ISO, where the shutter speed is becoming half second, quarter second, something that a person can stand still for, or a tree that's not going to move around in the wind too much, whatever it might be. And then you do some blending work together in post. I did a video on that technique using boats in a harbor. It's got to be close to a year ago, if not longer. And so I'll put a little pointer in this video so you can find it and check it out. But that's one other way to get sharp subjects in long exposures. Last question's from Peter in Washington, another one from our workshops as well. The camera is blinking this 30 at me, and what does it mean? Okay, so let me set the scene here. We're out after sunset, so light is low. Most of us are shooting in aperture priority mode, so we're telling the camera I want a certain depth of field, and then letting the camera decide how long it needs to keep the shutter open to capture the scene appropriately. Well, if the light is very low and you have a narrow or small aperture, f11, f16, something like that, it's quite possible the camera says, look, I need more than 30 seconds to gather all the light and get you a good exposure. But in our program modes, we can't shoot more than 30 seconds. That's just a general limitation of most of our modern digital cameras. So that's what the blinking 30 is telling you. The camera saying the highest I can go, the longest exposure I can create for you in this particular mode is 30 seconds. And I'm not going to do a good job based on the lighting that I'm sensing here. So it's blinking that 30 saying you need to do something. And the answer to solve that is what's called bulb mode. On Sony and Nikon, this is usually at the very end of the shutter dial when you're in manual mode. You'll get all the way up to 30 and then there's one more click and you'll go into bulb mode. On some Canon cameras, there's actually a bulb mode setting on the dial, which I didn't know about until recently. Either way, you go into bulb mode and then you are in control of how long the shutter will stay open. And depending on how you're releasing the shutter, usually it's a cable release. You may have a lock button where you press and you slide it forward to lock it in. You effectively think about it. You press the shutter and you're holding it down, and until you let go, it's going to remain open. And so that's how you can do your 45-second, 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute, however many minute exposures. So if your camera's blinking at you with saying I can't shoot, it's telling you I can't shoot at this particular scene, you need to take more control over and decide exactly how you want to capture this photo. And that does it for this week in the field. Hope you've enjoyed the questions and answers. And again, if you have questions, please send them on in to me. I love getting them. It makes me think about my photography. Hopefully my answers are helping you with your photography, and we can all get better together. So until next time, my name is Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.